Here we are doing another one of these things. Whew. It's October, it's slasher season, and that's what I'm doing this month. I'm watching slasher movies. Texas Chainsaw is a franchise known for pushing the boundaries, for visceral intensity and gore. Essentially a visual companion piece to a Slipknot album. But since Leatherface is a slasher icon, and that's what I'm doing this Halloween season, is watching slasher movies, I figured, hey, you know what? Why don't I watch all 9 of these Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies and rank them? So that's what I did. And in typical fashion for myself, I'm not just ranking them from worst to best, I am actually using a list of metrics to determine what the ultimate Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie is. That way you can just go watch the scientifically proven best one of these movies. And to keep this simple, every single one of these categories is going to have 10 possible points. First up is story and character, of which you can get 10 possible points. Then we have Leatherface moments, or otherwise the Leatherface factor. So what does the presence of Leatherface look like in our film? Okay, and then for our third category, we have visceral intensity. I know, big words here. That's going to incorporate things such as gore, intensity, scares, sound design, like how much does it make you feel like, ooh, ah, you know. And so that's kind of what that category is. Following that, we have atmospheric terror. Does it make you feel hot, sweaty, grimy, dirty? How are the set designs? Do you feel like you're in that Texas heat, brutal environment? And last but not least, entertainment value. So was I entertained or not? Now, if you add up the total scores of all 5 of these categories, you can get a total possible score of 50 points. I decided to throw in a little something extra for our Slipknot fans, and that is the Slipknot scale. You know, going from like the least brutal and intense Slipknot album to the most brutal and unrelenting Slipknot album. So we're gonna place our movie along that scale, so you have a good signifier of how brutal that movie is in comparison to how brutal your eardrums might be affected if you listen to that Slipknot album. So I've gone on long enough. Let's get into these movies. We're going to start right off with, naturally, the first entry into the entire series, Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. I want you to imagine sitting down in the theater in 1974 to watch this film. 6 years prior was when the MPAA rating system, you know, our ratings, were first enacted. And that was to replace the old Hays Code, which, if you're unfamiliar, meant that a movie had to have a certain moral code. You had to really dodge violence, gore, or sex in those kind of movies. I mean, think like classic 40s, 50s movies. Anyway, that's the world we were just exiting 6 years prior. So yeah, just put yourself in the mindset of that's where you're coming from. And this, essentially one of the first mainstream slasher horror movies ever, you go to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the first thing that pops up on the screen is...
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Like, what the f***? This had to have wrecked audiences at the time. I cannot imagine how ravaged you would have been in the movie theater watching this, just thinking about what kind of films you had seen prior to this. Now, granted, it did help initiate a cathartic exercise in representing violence on screen through movies to come. I mean, the entire 70s were a reaction to censorship and pushing into exploitation films and pushing boundaries. I also think it's important to note here that Tobe Hooper, the director of the film, he chose to make this feel like this was a real, true story, and that was his own way of commenting on the Nixon administration, the whole Watergate thing. Fake news is dangerous, and anyone can just go around calling something true, and people will believe it. But I gotta imagine the shock value of calling this a true story, and then the way it was shot, this very indie, low-budget, sweaty 70s film with a bunch of non-actors. No one knew these people that were in the film, so it kind of has that extra level of intensity of just feeling like a real story. It's not a found footage film, but it's kind of a precursor to found footage films in a way. Now, taking this into a modern context, oftentimes when you go back to like a classic film, something that started an entire genre in many ways, it can feel a little dated, or things can feel like familiar because we've seen so many of these tropes played out multiple times before. This still feels so fresh and unlike anything else I'd ever seen. I saw this movie for the first time only maybe 5 years ago. I watched it with my dad. It shocked me. Still, the very first reveal of Leatherface in this movie is one of the scariest scenes I've ever seen. It just hit me so hard and has never been replicated by its sequels or its imitators. Still, the way that the pieces of this movie come together and build to its finale, it's really impressively done. There's these characters that become part of the Sawyer family, and once they're introduced, they're so grotesque, and they're this family of cannibals. And the way that they treat Leatherface, they almost like bully him, this guy that has been such a huge threat, and it kind of flips the narrative. You know, they call him things like simple-minded, and we kind of learn that maybe he is mentally ill and not fully with it, but that almost makes him more scary because you never know what he'll do. That family dynamic, I think, is what really makes this movie come to another level. The performances from all of the characters that are part of the villain group are astounding. Like, they're so good. They almost bring with it this almost humor and this comedy, which I think just makes it more frightening. The performances of a lot of the teenagers is not so great necessarily, and I do think, like, at the very end, the supper scene, like Sally, she just kind of relentlessly screams for a very long time, and that can be a little bit grating. These are all minor criticisms. I think The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a fantastic film. Iconic Leatherface moments, iconic atmosphere and tone, and just creepy to its core. Oh, and where this fits on the Slipknot scale, I think that this goes solidly in line on the higher end of the intensity, even though it's not very gory, to what I would consider to be the second most intense Slipknot album, which is their first album. It's raw, it's intense, and yeah, I think it's that rawness that really connects with that. Anyway, moving on. Okay, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This movie came out in 1986, a little over 10 years after its first film, but it does bring back a whole slew of cast members from the Sawyer family. Right out of the gate, there's this absolutely wild scene of Chop Top driving the car, Leatherface just out of the top of the car with a chainsaw, and they're on a bridge, and they're trying to attack some other car on the bridge while heavy metal music plays. It's a totally different vibe. It's kind of glitz, it's kind of glam, it's just bonkers, right? And then we cut to like different scenes within the town where you have like the dad from the first movie. He's part of a chili competition, and he's clearly got like teeth in that chili, but his chili actually wins the competition. The radio station, you got this weird ass guy who's just like burning a hanger and scratching himself. Like, who comes up with the stuff in these movies? I mean, I guess it's Tobe Hooper, but the characters are just so psycho. There's something about a Tobe Hooper Texas Chainsaw movie that's very unsettling. It definitely matches that tone of the first movie while also bringing a new kind of energy and I guess you could say comedic tone, but it's still very dark. This movie has Dennis Hopper, who plays the sheriff of the town. He's a little kooky too. You know, there's this scene with him like testing out chainsaws, and it's a pretty fun scene. But he's set on catching the Sawyer family. And then there's the main girl whose name escapes me, but she works at a radio station, and I guess Leatherface and Chop Top are after her, and they want to capture her and bring her back to their lair. The movie doesn't really have much of a story going for it. However, I do think that the vibes and the atmosphere are very good. And somewhere around the middle, there's like this, what I would say is probably the most intense scene in the film, which is at the radio station. And Leatherface's reveal there is also very strong, and the action that happens there is intense. I like the insight we get into like the banter between Chop Top and Leatherface. And God, they're just such gross characters. But yeah, the back half of the movie really takes place back in the Sawyer family's kind of dungeon in a way. It's just these elaborate kind of tunnels underground with bone statues, and it's very elaborate and over the top. I think that's just what this movie was going for. It's just a very exaggerative, almost carnival style feel to it. They amp the gore up a little bit. Like I said, it's very gross. I know I keep just saying that, but there's just the characters are just gross, man. I don't know how else to explain it. I do think for me, though, personally, my enjoyment factor for this is going to be a little bit lower. I just didn't really have much of a story to grab onto. I didn't find myself as invested. And the back half of this movie really played out a lot like the first movie, where it's just this supper scene and our main girl is called to supper and we meet all the family members, and it just kind of felt like a retread. I don't think it hits quite the same level of intensity. So we'll reveal where this ranks among all the films at the end, but we're still going to check in with our Slipknot scale. Now I'm going to put this movie kind of towards the middle. And we're going to go with The End So Far, which is the most recent Slipknot album. It's highly experimental, and while it has heavy moments, it also adventures into lighter tones. It's got a little classic thrash and a little glitz and glam. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Leatherface, or otherwise known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. This film came out in... When the hell did this film come out? In 1990, and is not directed by Tobe Hooper. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 starts out how most other Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies start. It starts out with a road trip, a little bit of roadkill, but in this case, it's specifically a couple of which the acting is very bad, but our main guy character, he reminds me of Billy from the Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I don't know. I could look up the actors' names. I apologize for not, but I'm sure that they'll be fine with me not looking it up because I don't think he was very good in it. In fact, he's very unlikable. But right away, this movie established itself as showing gore in a more intense way. I can't remember. There's this weird, like, milky substance coming out of bodies that it's pretty gross. Our two main characters stop at a gas station and they meet Viggo Mortensen, I didn't even realize he was in this, and he's really good in this. He's a very mysterious cowboy kind of character that shows up at the gas station, but you also have this gas station attendant he's sitting there like looking at porn magazines, but he's like slicing up the girls in it with scissors. Yeah, they come up with some creepy, weird-ass, like, bottom-of-the-barrel characters in these movies, and this does not shy away from that either. Ultimately, Viggo Mortensen recommends that they change the direction of how they're driving to get home and take a different route instead, and that shortcut road eventually leaves them stranded and near the Leatherface lair, if you will. So the movie unfolds kind of like other Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. They become out in the middle of nowhere. It becomes nighttime. There's some really great chainsaw moments in the woods. There's another character that gets involved. He's played by Ken Foree. I looked him up because I really enjoyed him in this movie. I think once he's introduced, the movie gets a lot better. I care a lot more about the characters. And then, of course, we go to the final moments again where it's another supper scene, but we're introduced to a new cast of characters that are the family. It's not our same cast from the previous two films. However, Leatherface is still a part of it. I think that there's some really good stuff here, although, again, it is starting to feel a little bit like is the end of all of these Chainsaw Massacre movies just a supper scene where we sit with the family and we have like a cannibalistic meal. I don't know, but it's starting to feel a little bit like a retread, but at least we're getting like a new family, so there's new dynamics to kind of learn about and see. But I'm also very confused if this is the same Leatherface. Like, is this Leatherface supposed to be the Leatherface from the last two movies? Or is he a new character as well? Because the other characters aren't like, they're not recastings. They're like genuinely new characters. So that's all very confusing. Also, this movie is called Leatherface, but it doesn't offer any additional Leatherface scenes or information than we got in the first two movies. In fact, it maybe offers less. I have more questions at the end of this movie about who Leatherface is in this. And in general, I would say he feels a little bit off from how he did in the first two. I think it's because the actor changed. He almost gives like a Jason Voorhees vibe. But then I was looking up trivia for this movie and I saw that the actual actor that played Jason Voorhees was the stunt coordinator on this. And so then it suddenly made a lot of sense. Like there's this scene where Leatherface just jumps out of the water and it's like exactly like a Jason Voorhees moment. So yeah, I'm kind of going on here. I will say though that my enjoyment factor here was a lot higher. I found myself getting pretty invested in the story. It felt more like it had a story, whereas the last movie didn't really. Its production quality was a little bit higher as far as the type of camera work. It wasn't so raw necessarily, which in a way that kind of like takes away from the grittiness of the film, but the atmosphere still remained. It was still a very grimy film. So I would say that Leatherface Chapter 3 of Texas Chainsaw, whatever the fuck this is called, it has less Leatherface moments or maybe comparable Leatherface moments and doesn't offer a lot there. But as far as a movie goes, like the Viggo Mortensen character is very compelling. I enjoyed it more than the second one. Okay, so on the Slipknot scale, this is going to go Point 5, The Gray Chapter. A little bit more intense in its appearance, right? It's hammering the same drums over and over again, but it lacks like that depth. It lacks that real rawness or energy. It's still enjoyable though. There we go. Moving on. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, The Next Generation, or New Beginnings, or whatever it's called on whatever platform you're looking at, because Letterboxd and IMDb have two different titles for this film. This one has Matthew McConaughey in it though, which I did know about, but I'd forgotten about. But this movie starts out at like a prom kind of scenario where a bunch of schools at a dance. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of going for like, I don't know, some Scream vibes. Like it's trying to pick up on some what other 90s movies were doing. But man, its main cast of teenager characters, they are despicable humans. I mean, Renee Zellweger, she's kind of our main girl, and she's not necessarily despicable, but she's definitely forgettable and doesn't have much going on character-wise. But the other dudes and the man, it's pretty bad. They leave the prom dance and then they're driving on the backwoods in Texas, and Texas Chainsaw stuff goes off. I don't know. The production quality on this one actually feels like lower than the third movie. It has like cheap made-for-TV lighting in a way. Something about it feels like it was shot on like digital handheld cams. Now, I know it was like intentional to kind of make these movies feel shot in an amateur kind of way to kind of make you feel like these are true stories. And so maybe that's what they were going for here, but it really didn't work for me in this one. In fact, when gross stuff started to happen or when characters behaved in really gross ways, it started to make me feel just uncomfortable, like I shouldn't be watching this movie. And because I'm not invested in the movie, that wasn't a good thing. It was just like, I don't want to be watching this. I don't like this, you know? Matthew McConaughey is a creepy, pretty vile character. There's not a lot of nuance to him. Like in the other Texas Chainsaw movies, we get introduced to like odd characters along the way. And we're kind of wondering, are they going to be a part of the family at the end, or are they not? Are they going to be like a villain, or are they not? It's pretty clear right out of the gate, and I think that maybe that was the intention, but there's just no dynamic to Matthew McConaughey that he could possibly even be a good character. And he's giving like an 11 out of 10 performance as far as like going for it, but it just doesn't work. I mean, parts of it are okay. It's not like it's terrible, but the movie is trying too hard to do what other movies had done well. Also, the end of this movie is fucking weird and confusing. We get like this businessman that shows up. Yeah, they're just trying to add all these elements to kind of make it creative and feel like, oh, we're doing something new and you guys don't know what's going to happen, even though we're again at a final supper scene again. It's like the same thing we've done all four movies, a big final supper scene, but this time the new family, because it's a new family again, completely uninteresting. Leatherface feels really off in this movie, like his performance, just everything, like the Leatherface moments are lower, and he's just not, there's just nothing going on there, like doing it for me. But yeah, Renee Zellweger, she's like escaping, and there's this weird like plane stunt that happens, and that I guess it was kind of cool, but I don't know. I'm kind of going all over the place. There's this businessman that showed up in a limo. I guess he's the villain. He kind of has some control over this family. I don't know. At the end, he picks up Renee Zellweger in the car and then takes her to a hospital. And then in that hospital, there's some lady pulled off on a gurney, and it ends right there. And it's just like, okay, is he helping her or not? Like, why did he take her there? I mean, maybe it was just setting up for a sequel. I don't know. I didn't learn this immediately after, but I learned it kind of later on as I was going through this venture. Apparently the girl on the gurney was supposed to be Sally from the very first movie. And so maybe they were just going to tie in the fact that this businessman has like a mogul capital on all the Texas Chainsaw victims or some shit. I don't really know. But I didn't like this movie, if you couldn't tell. But yeah, I mean, I'm just so confused at this point if Leatherface is the same Leatherface. And maybe that just doesn't matter, but they try to tie the movies together in some ways, because they, at the very beginning, the opening text crawl refers to the other films in the franchise, so it would imply that it's the same world and it's the same Leatherface. Is Leatherface just going and finding some new crazy-ass family to live with? I really don't know, because it's not the same family from 3, and it's not the family from the first 2, but it is Leatherface. But then Leatherface portrayal is different because of the different actors playing him, and I don't know, man. The franchise needed a break after number 4, that's for sure. On our scale of Slipknot albums representing brutality and intensity, I would go with All Hope Is Gone, because it's kind of... All Hope Is Gone has some like good moment, has some heavy moments, but it's also just kind of like generic rock a lot of the time, and that's kind of what this movie felt, generic. Also, there's a song called Snuff that's one of the softer songs, but Snuff and Snuff Film, there you go. There's the tie-in. I don't know. It's a weaker album. It's a weaker movie. Okay. The series is in need of a reboot. Now, I'm clarifying reboot here because that's different than legacy sequel. Reboots were popular in the 2000s. Legacy sequels have become popular in the late 2010s and 2020s. The difference being that they both sometimes carry the same name, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but for whatever reason, the reboot is a reboot and it's trying to redo the same thing. The legacy sequels is supposed to be part of the same franchise. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there now because the titles for the films going forward, they get kind of confusing. Let's just say that. But this is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003. We have Jessica Biel in a Michael Bay movie wearing a white tank top and a cowboy hat. And it's not directed by Michael Bay, but he's a producer on it. And it feels very much like, yeah, that's Michael Bay. But it's directed by Marcus Nispel, who I watched the special features. I actually have a lot of respect for him as a filmmaker and hearing him kind of talk about this film. But what's really fascinating about the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre is they bring back the same cinematographer from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre film. However, it does not feel at all like the same direction as far as how the cinematography is going. But what is fascinating to me is that the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre was such an impact, like visually, how it was made, that it established a certain tone that its sequels tried to recapture. This movie sets a new tone that every movie that comes after tries to capture again. And so the same cinematographer effectively made two very impactful films in two very different ways that are kind of remakes from each other. I just think that's important to note because the atmosphere and the vibe, it is next level in this movie because you have certain modern filmmaking techniques and cinematography blended with this very careful set design and production. You get like a key light and then you just get characters that are wet with either sweat or grime or just dirty from the environments that they're in. And every shot just feels like you're soaking up the environment of like the Texas heat, the grotesque torture chambers. It's the kind of movie you can almost feel and you can almost smell it. It's very atmospheric. That creates a vibe and a terror and a tone. You know, atmospheric terror is one of our categories. It introduces characters in new ways and it kind of plays with the picking up a hitchhiker thing differently than the first movie did. And oh my God, the scene where the hitchhiker, which is very early on, the hitchhiker shoots herself and the camera moves from, I'll just have to throw the shot up here so you can see it. The camera move is unreal. It's such a violent and gruesome shot though, so sorry for showing you guys that. Like the beginning is kind of like, teenage kids, I don't even know if I buy into the acting. Jessica Biel feels a little too virtuous, you know, and a little over the top. And as soon as this scene happens, the reality sets in. The movie doesn't let go. It's intense as hell. The performances get better. And then Arlie Ermey as the sheriff is just a massive standout. He brings it home. And then speaking of Leatherface in this movie, I really love the design of Leatherface. I would say as a character, we get a little bit less nuance. We get a little bit less information than like the original did on why he behaves the way he does. But his scenes where he's hunting them down, where he's got the chainsaw out, it's the most intense Leatherface that we've seen to this point. He is terrifying every time he is on screen. And the last like 30 minutes of this movie is just Leatherface moments, and they're very intense. I still remember the impact this movie had. I didn't see this in 2003. I actually just watched this movie for the first time a few years ago, and then I watched it again for this video. But I still remember being scared, so scared of the way that this Texas Chainsaw movie looked, and it inspired so many haunted house features at the time. The different haunted houses that I went to around, like, I guess 2003 to probably like 2010, they just continued to imitate this Leatherface like style and give us these chainsaw moments that they scared me so much. And then seeing the movie and what inspired it, I'm like, oh shit, like they were just drawing on this movie for so much of it. I gotta move on probably. A couple of other quick things about this movie that I think set it apart being that it's a remake. It doesn't do the Sawyer family again. It's not the same exact characters. It's the Hewitt family. So it's it tries to kind of reinterpret the concepts, but it doesn't stray so far away that you're like, ah, man, this isn't a remake, because it still does the same general things. I really like the use of the little boy, and it kind of gives me these like People Under the Stairs vibes with like a chase scene that happens with him later. And then it's kind of implied that the Hewitt family, they've, massacred and captured different like travelers that have come through, and then they've stolen those children, and then they like raised those children. And so it's an interesting insight into the fact that maybe, well, for instance, like maybe that kid character was obviously probably not blood of the Hewitt family, but he's being raised in this really bad environment, and that he kind of has like a little bit of good in him in a way. And I don't know, I kind of like the use, the kind of lore and world building that it does with like its limited time that it can give to that. But it's very effective every time that it tries to build a little bit of lore. So Texas Chainsaw 2003, you can probably tell I'm a pretty big fan of it. Really enjoy the movie. Watching it again too, like still hooked. I kind of thought, oh, I remember the movie well enough. I don't know if it'll still hit the same way. It does. It's a very good movie. So on the Slipknot scale, guys, this is going all the way to the very top with Iowa, the most brutal Slipknot album for what I would consider to be the most brutally intense and relentless Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie up to now. Moving on. Okay, 2006. The next film in the franchise is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. Not my favorite title. This was a response to how commercially successful the last remake was. So they wanted to make another movie in that series, but if you know how Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 ends, it'd be kind of hard to follow it up. So they go back to the beginning. What I actually enjoy about this movie being called that it's the beginning, it's not like Leatherface as a baby or some shit like that. It's like 4 years prior to Texas Chainsaw 03. I was really nervous that this movie would try to give us unnecessary backstory, and what I learned from the Halloween franchise and the video I just did about that, when you try to fill in all this backstory, it can just take away from the ambiguity and the fear of it. The best kind of backstory comes like organically through the limited viewpoints that we get of our main characters in those situations. And this movie does a good job of not really telling us way too much about these characters. Like, we get to see R. Lee Ermey become the sheriff, but that is such a good scene. Yeah, this is an R. Lee Ermey movie, actually. That already raises the bar for this because R. Lee Ermey is so impactful on screen. He's got such gravity, and you just never know what he's gonna do. He's a very terrifying character as the sheriff and with this kind of power. But anyway, he kidnaps 3 kids, 3 out of 4 of the kids that are road tripping together, and discovers that one of them is trying to get out of joining the Vietnam War, and he looks really poorly on that. So he finds his own way to pick on them, abuse them, kind of torture them. Then we have Jordana Brewster. She's the only one that didn't get kidnapped, so she works her way back to the house and is trying to figure out how to save her friends. I liked the way that the structure worked in this film. It felt a little bit more unique at that point. It all still took place at the house, and of course, it does have a supper scene, a little bit of a supper scene. Because you gotta have the supper scene where you get the whole family together. I didn't talk about that with the last Texas Chainsaw movie, but they kind of subverted the supper scene in that one. So it's not that I have anything against supper scenes. It gets tired, when you do it 4 times in a row. So what am I trying to say here? Okay, so I do think the Leatherface moments overall, though, they are scaled down because R. Lee Ermey kind of steals the show. It's more of his movie. Leatherface, though, his chainsaw scenes are very effective. There's this scene where Jordana Brewster is like trying to save her boyfriend, and then Leatherface comes down and she has to get under this table that he's on top of, and then he starts dissecting the boyfriend, and chainsaw's coming down underneath through the table, and she's underneath trying to dodge the chainsaw, but blood is just coming on her, and she knows her boyfriend is dying, and it's just super tragic. But it is a horrific moment. And yeah, I think her performance is excellent. I think all the kids are really good in it. The first like 10 minutes again, I was like, oh, I don't know about these performances, but I think everyone's very effective because the production and set design is so good. The cinematography kind of matches that. But there are moments, especially early on, where the cinematography feels a little bit like a step down, a little bit made for TV in a couple of moments. Now, it's not the same director or cinematographer here, but you get a lot of really good shots through like the grass or looking through a crate, or like it puts us in a feeling of like we're hiding from something. The atmosphere is still up to here. The grotesqueness is still very high. Its gore felt even more amplified once the movie got going again, just like the predecessor. It does not let up, and it's an edge of your seat movie the whole time. So when we're talking Slipknot scale, it doesn't hit quite as hard as Iowa, which I think is the most intense it gets, but it's definitely self-titled, similar to the very first movie. It's just like that album, I gotta use it twice because it's not as raw maybe as like the first movie is, but it's definitely brutal and intense as hell. So we gotta keep it on the intense, brutal scale this side of the Slipknot albums. So moving on, Texas Chainsaw 3D, starring Alexandra Daddario. And so this is what I was talking about. The titles and the naming conventions get a little wacky. This is called Texas Chainsaw, just Texas Chainsaw. It is not a follow-up to the last two from the reboot series, but it is in fact a sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. I guess it might, in this timeline, include Chainsaw 2, 3, and 4. I don't really know, but it does directly reference and is a direct sequel, at least, to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974. Yeah, man, they got to figure out how to name these horror movies in a way that makes any sense. We learned at the beginning of this movie that back in 73, after the events of the first movie, that an angry mob goes and burns down the Sawyer house and kills a bunch of the Sawyer family. There's this woman of the Sawyer family who gives birth, and then the angry mob kills the woman, takes the baby, and we learn that that baby is Alexandra Daddario grown up. So now we flash forward. That's where it gets a little confusing because this movie has like cell phones because it was shot in 2013, but the beginning takes place at 1973. Alexandra Daddario is not 40 years old. She's like an 18-year-old girl who's still living with her parents. I guess it just doesn't matter. A lot of stuff in this movie just doesn't matter because early on I was getting really caught up in the shitty dialogue. Like, she has scenes with her parents, and her adopted parents are so despicable. They're just like Confederate flag flying, awful, awful people. But that's how everything in this movie kind of feels. It's like everything is just the extreme one way or the other. The dialogue is very on the nose and overt and exaggerated. Characters have no nuance. They're either evil or virtuous. But once I kind of hooked into that tone, I actually found myself able to have a lot of fun with this movie. It was exaggerated, but you know what? Its story was pretty fucking interesting because Daddario, she inherits, I think her name is Heather, she inherits the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house because her last living relative passes away and knew of the existence of the long-lost Sawyer daughter. So she leaves her awful, abusive parents. She's supposed to be road tripping to New Orleans, and they're going through Texas on the way. She goes with her friends and check out her new house. And she gets in the house, and of course, turns out Leatherface still lives in the basement. But I actually liked this premise, and this is very much a Leatherface movie because we learn a lot about Leatherface, but also he's like there's no other like Sawyer family. It's just Leatherface. We get a lot of really cool Leatherface moments. I would say the gore on this movie is like, it's very high, like the most so far, but very much like in a Saw movie way. But as far as like atmospheric terror is concerned, I do feel like the atmosphere it's much more procedural the way it's shot, and the looks, it's not like as grimy, it's not as gross, it's much more polished. And then, you know, someone's leg gets cut off and it's as gory as it can possibly be. It's somewhere in between all that. But yeah, there are some really cool vibey moments though. Like there's a scene of Leatherface coming out of the house with all the smoke and fog. Daddario finds herself in a coffin and he's coming after her. Like she hides in a coffin that's in the cemetery in her front yard. But it's a very vibey movie in like a different way. I found that this is a movie you can have a lot of fun with. Now the ending, maybe light spoilers here. The ending does get a little whack because alongside all this Texas Chainsaw stuff going on, they're kind of developing this other family, the sheriff family, the Hartmans. And it's like clear that they're setting up throughout this movie that the Hartman family, who kind of run the town and are the sheriffs, are the real villains. And there's this almost like empathy or sympathy given to like the Sawyer family because Daddario's from the Sawyer family line. So at the end of this movie, Leatherface notices the Sawyer family brand on Alexandra Daddario, and they team up and they take out the Hartman. So it's a little fucking wacko in that sense. And there's this really awful line, Alexandra Daddario saying, "You're up, cuz," like, and kicks the chainsaw over to her cousin Leatherface. And that is cheesy. But like I said, if you're riding with the cheesiness, This movie's actually really fun, and I like that it did commit to cheesiness, because we needed a good bad movie in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, in my opinion. One that was okay being fucking cheesy, because I like that kind of stuff. Whew. All right, on the Slipknot scale, we get to stay in like the kind of heavy vein because I think the brutality is very high. We Are Not Your Kind. The gore is brutal, but it's a bit more melodic in its filmmaking, if you will. Not as raw, but more refined, sure. Okay, we're getting there, folks. 2017, we get our second film titled Leatherface. As I said, the naming convention is just fucking whack. This movie's called Leatherface. There was already a Leatherface, which was Texas Chainsaw 3, which barely even talked about Leatherface. So this movie, I'm like, okay, they're going to try to give us the beginning, if you will. And that's what they do. They take us back to like the first time Mr. Leatherface ever touched a chainsaw when he was like 5 years old, and he's being forced by the Sawyer family, because we're in the Sawyer family timeline. I don't know if this is a sequel to the 2013 one, or I guess a prequel to the 2013 one, but I think it's intended to be. I think. But we see him as a little boy, and then we flash forward. We follow these kind of criminals as they escape the penitentiary, and it becomes kind of like a crime on the run type of movie, a bit Bonnie and Clyde with two of our leads. It feels like it's trying too hard to be like Tarantino or something. It just feels like it's trying hard. Again, a common issue with these movies. But it is definitely not following any classic Texas Chainsaw plot structure in any way. But there are scenes where the psychotic family is like killing people, and the brutality is very high in this one too. And there's this weird sex scene between the two psychotic people where they're having sex over like a dead body. It's really, I don't know. Again, it feels like it's trying too hard. You also have like a sheriff going along the way trying to catch this kind of murderous family. Oh, but then it's revealed that the sheriff is a Hartman. And if you remember, the Hartmans are fucking bad from the last movie. It's kind of hard to talk about this one without talking about spoilers, because the basis of this film is built around the intrigue that we don't really know where the movie is going or what it's completely about. You know, we're following kind of like this bigger mute kid, these two kind of insane people. And I guess you make the assumption that like, oh, that's Leatherface. This is the start of the crazy Sawyer family. They're all batshit crazy. They take two people along with them that they need help from, I guess, that are kind of like level-headed people, and a little romance built between them. But maybe they're all going to be part of the Sawyer family. And then the two psychotic people get kind of killed off. And you're like, oh shit, I guess it's maybe the two more innocent people and Leatherface team up, and that becomes the Sawyer family. We get to see how that kind of changes. The bigger kid dies, and then the one guy, the nice guy, gets shot, and then you're just like, oh shit, I guess I don't even know where this is like, we're getting to the end. I don't know where this movie is going. But anyway, long story short, it turns out the guy that got shot is actually alive, but he got shot in a way that makes it so he can't speak. And he turns out to be Leatherface. They go back to his family house. He's actually the young boy from the beginning with the chainsaw, 5 years old. It's this huge twist. Oh my gosh. But the thing about this twist that sucks is that it's like, if that's Leatherface, then where's like the mental illness aspect of him? Where's the bullied and abused version of him? He's just this like charming, likable guy the whole movie. There just wasn't enough in his backstory and nuance to make me believe that this was Leatherface. It was purely to subvert expectations and for shock value only. And then once you realize retroactively that the whole movie was built around that premise, it was like who you assumed was Leatherface isn't Leatherface, and who you assumed was the family isn't the family. It's actually all this shit, these people. The whole thing is built on subverting your expectations and giving you a twist ending, but a twist ending that's very unsatisfying and then makes the movie not rewatchable at the same time. So not a very good movie in my opinion. I'm not a big fan, but its atmosphere is actually pretty on point. It's very grimy. You feel the heat, the sweat, all that stuff is back. On the Slipknot scale, this is going back down here towards All Hope Is Gone, towards the bottom, because it's bookended by some violence, but it's mostly forgettable radio rock. And whew, okay, we made it, folks. We are at the final Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I watched all of these movies in the span of like 8 days, all 9 of these movies. And my God, something I learned. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, they are not bingeable. They do not build on each other. They repeat themselves so often in the amount of reboots and legacy sequels and renaming conventions. Like, you're just confused at where people fit into the canon of things. They don't flow. They're not bingeable. Okay, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. yet again another movie just titled Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, this one is the aforementioned Legacy sequel. This takes place in the same universe the original Texas Chainsaw takes place. I don't know if it's the same as any of the other ones, but it is the first one. A bunch of Gen Alpha, Gen Z kids show up to the old town that all these movies take place in, I guess. I don't know what the town's called. They stop by a gas station where it's very clear and made clear very beginning that like Leatherface is an icon of this town. And there's newspaper clippings, and they set up the idea that Sally from the very first movie, she's been on a hell-bent mission to find Leatherface for 40 years. That's all planted in our brains at the beginning, and then they move away from it so that they can shock us with Sally at the end of the film. They show up to this town because this group of teenagers, or I guess young adults, I should say, they bought a property, turns out to be the old Leatherface house, that they're going to try to turn into like their business, and they're going to build this town up and make it a new like boom spot. I will say I really like the set design of this town. The town is very cool. It's very vibey. They use a lot of cool lighting and even neon lighting in the night scenes to make this place feel very vibrant. It's very aesthetically pleasing. I very much like it. In the vein of the original Texas Chainsaw or any of the previous ones, no. I would say that its atmosphere isn't actually very scary, but it is very much like Black Ops Zombies 2. That town, except not on fire, and there's this bus party going on, and so then it reminds me of that whole level transit with the bus and going through the town. It just feels like that at one point later in the movie. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Whatever. Nonsense unfolds. Texas Chainsaw shit starts to go down, and it's just another Leatherface movie. The two movies called Leatherface barely have Leatherface, and then two of our most recent just Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies are like just straight Leatherface movies. This is a straight Leatherface movie, which I'm not complaining about. I actually think there's some really cool Leatherface moments in here. There's some wild stuff where he's like kicking the chainsaw and it goes swirling across the ground towards one of the victims, and there's some really cool use of the chainsaw that feels fresh and unique. Then there's this bus massacre scene that is very brutal, actually. I wasn't expecting the gore to be that high. It's a made-for-Netflix movie. For some reason, I thought it would just be kind of toned back in general. It wasn't. The gore is high, but the actual intensity of the movie is not there. Like, it's not a very intense movie, and a big part of that is because this is the only Texas Chainsaw movie up to this point that just has all of those classic slasher tropes that you hate. When a character has an opportunity to do something and then they just hesitate and they don't do something. When the villain has an opportunity to kill someone and then just for some reason doesn't. This movie is full of so many frustrating hesitation moments and drawn out sequences that make no sense. And then Sally comes back in at the end. She's old now. She's got her shotgun. She's been waiting for her moment. She finds Leatherface. She's got the shotgun to his head, but then she wants Leatherface to remember her so badly to justify, I guess, all the guilt that she's felt, that she won't do anything. She won't shoot him yet. He doesn't remember her. He walks out of the room. For some reason, doesn't kill her, and she just cries and doesn't do anything. And then he goes attacking all the teens again, and then Sally runs out and is like, I'm not letting you do that, and finally takes a shot, but it's too late. He like runs, and then she gets chopped up and thrown somewhere, and you think she's dead, but don't worry, folks. 10 minutes later, when they need like a Deus Ex Machina moment, she's alive just enough to make the final shot and shoot him and whatever the fuck, you know. It's full of all that bullshit. It's just so frustrating. So the two characters live after killing Leatherface, so you think. They drive off in their Tesla that can drive for them, but then the like one girl gets ripped out of the passenger seat and her head gets lobbed off by Leatherface, who just shows up out of nowhere, even though they just killed him, and somehow can catch up to the driving car and pull her out of it. But it's just enough for like a shock value moment at the end. And then the other girl who's in the self-driving car pops her head out of the sunroof and is just looking back at her dead friend or sister, I can't remember their relation, and Leatherface as he's doing this. But she's in a self-driving car, so she can be sitting out the top backwards, and so it's a really cool moment, like cinematography wise, and I think that's cool, but it doesn't make any sense. And this movie's just full of things that were gonna look cool or feel cool, but they don't make sense. I do not like this movie. I would never rewatch this. For Slipknot album, I'm gonna give it the very bottom, which, by the way, it's not to say I don't like this Slipknot album. Volume 3, the Subliminal Verses, because it's maybe the most palatable Slipknot album, and this is maybe the most palatable Texas Chainsaw. By the way, what did you guys think of the Slipknot scale? That doesn't play into my final ranking. If you like that kind of thing, then let me know. Okay, whew. After that exhausting week and a half, or like a week and a day of watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, I finally did it. Before I get to my final rankings of all of these films, I just want to tell you guys that I love and appreciate you so much for watching my videos. And if you like this, please like and subscribe and follow me on Letterboxd and comment below, because it means a lot to me to interact with you guys. Okay, the moment of truth. What is the ultimate Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie? We're gonna start with what ranked at the absolute lowest. So starting at the very bottom, this is number 9 on our list. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, The Next Generation, with 19 points out of 50. Number 8, Leatherface 2017, with 22 points out of 50. Number 7, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, with 25 out of 50 points. Yeah, that ranked higher than I expected it to. Number 6 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, with 29 out of 50 points. And then right above that at number 5 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, or Leatherface, with 30 points out of 50. Number 4, our first big leap up in points, is Texas Chainsaw 3D 2013. 37 out of 50 points. I like this movie. I recommend this movie. Okay, our top 3. Here we go. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning. This got 43 out of 50 points. And then in second place, people are going to be mad. I'm actually a little surprised myself. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974 with 44 out of 50 points. Very close to a perfect score though. But our number 1 obviously is 2003's Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake with 47 out of 50 points. Being that it's a remake, it did the impossible and it expanded on the lore. I actually think that the first one actually is probably better. But based on these metrics, it is the ultimate Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I think it combines all of the elements that make a great Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, and is a perfect entry point into the franchise if you're looking to get into the franchise, even though most of the goddamn films here suck. All right, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Keep an eye on the channel because I've got more of these coming throughout the month of October. I've watched so many slasher movies throughout September in preparation for this, and I'm still watching some as I'm getting caught up on a few others. We'll catch you guys in the next video.